Hello, Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter. There's some interesting video stuff going on with Donald Trump. Some things that are not aligned with the traditional foreign policy, hawkish neocon stuff. And I'm going to see what Scott thinks of it. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter. Scott, hey, before we get started, make sure you go to scottritter.com. That's Scott Ritter, his name.com, where you can find all of Scott's good work. And of course, there's an option for you to donate and to help Scott. Look, you guys, he's on all the time, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views on his video. And, he does this all on his own dime. So everybody, we need to help Scott. Keep his good work going. Also, hey, guess what? We got a join button now, so you can join and become a member. It's like $4 or $5 a month or something of the channel, so that'll help. Scott, I understand you got a couple of events coming up here in Washington, D.C. and New York City. If you could let us know about them.
Yeah, no, as you know, I just had a book published with Clarity Press covering Ukraine. It was a joint effort with Anya Kay. She has that great podcast Through the Eyes of Anya Kay. And we're bringing her to the United States. So she's going to come. We're going to start off in New York City on the 15th. There's an event in the Bronx, and it's a ticketed event. I wish we could do these things for free, but airplane tickets aren't free, hotels aren't free. But I just thought it would be very interesting to have Anya Kay come in and to have the two of us be able to speak on this issue. Ukraine is going to be, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it later on in this podcast, Ukraine is front and center. And the book provides, a very concise but thorough history of how we got to where we are and what one can expect. So basically, Anya will be interviewing me, and we'll be taking questions from the audience. So on the 15th in the Bronx, on the 19th, we'll be in Washington, D.C. At Busboys and Poets. That event, I believe, begins at 5 p.m. On the 19th. And then on the 21st, we're finishing up in Poughkeepsie, New York at Farmers and Chefs, a great venue. I've been there in the past doing my Disarmament at the Time Perestroika book. Again, a ticketed event. These are three opportunities to see Anya Kay and to watch her and I, interact in person. I've never met her, so this will be interesting. We'll be, doing the interviews in person, and we'll be taking questions and, of course, signing books. And if you go to scottritter.com, you'll see there we have a flyer out there for that. And I just would, I think it's a great opportunity if people can make it to do that.
Excellent. And if you go to the ones in DC, I'll be there to meet you also. My plan is to go to those events, so looking forward to it. Let's start here, Scott. Interesting things happening with Donald Trump now. Let's look at this video. We're listening. We're going to listen.
So, a big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that that's been like written in stone. And somewhere along the line, Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep, and I could understand their feeling about that. But there were a lot of mistakes made in that negotiation. And when I heard the way that Biden was negotiating, I said, you're going to end up in a war. And it turned out to be a very bad war. And it could escalate. That war could escalate to be much worse than it is right now. They can never join. Well, my view is that it was always understood. In fact, I believe that they had a deal and then Biden broke it. They had a deal which would have been a satisfactory deal to Ukraine and everybody else, but that Biden said, no, you have to be able to join NATO.
again, I'm no fan of any particular politician. As Frederick Douglass said, I will join any man to do good and no one to do evil, right? So that's where I am right now. But when I listen to this, I say, I've heard this is going to sound crazy. From talking about Donald Trump, I heard a politician tell the truth, and a truth that is antithetical to everything we've been hearing from the media, from the government, the things that censorship. You would literally, when this conflict started, or when Russia entered the conflict in 2022, if you said those things, you'd be thrown off of all of the.
Yeah.
If you or I said that, we know we both said it, and we both have
it.
saying it. Scott Ritter, your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
Look, as you rightly pointed out, this war was about NATO expansion. That's a Russian talking point. You can't say that. You're not allowed to bring up William Burns' 2008 memorandum to, when he was the ambassador to Russia. The "niet" means "niet," the red line that Russia drew. You're not allowed to talk about any of this stuff because it's fake. It's a Russian narrative. If you buy into that, you're justifying Russia's intervention. My God, how could you do that? We'll ban you. We'll silence you. Or the Ukrainian government, early on when they put me on the death list, and the number one thing was he's repeating Russian propaganda points, specifically that this was about NATO expansion. Oh no, you can't say that, because it's the truth. And Donald Trump is finally acknowledging the truth. This is all about NATO expansion. Now, it's about more than that. Donald Trump. Here's my problem with Trump. He was president from 2017 to 2020, or 21. He oversaw Ukraine policy at a time when Russia was trying to get the Minsk Accords done. I'd like to ask Donald Trump what instructions he gave his National Security Council and his Department of State in terms of furthering the Minsk. I understand that when he was president, the U.S. talking point was that the Russians weren't honest in their efforts to implement Minsk, and that this was a Russian problem. I also understand that he was the president when we were training Ukrainian forces at NATO military bases to specifically fight the Russians. Was he not aware of why we were training the Ukrainians? Was he not aware that Minsk was always a sham? So I have problems with this. I'm glad Trump's saying what he's saying right now, but and my dogs are glad that Trump's saying what he's saying right now. It's a horrible time of the day because we have neighbors that have their own dogs and they walk them by the house, and they like slow walk them. I think they actually watch some of the shows and they know that I'm doing this, and so they deliberately just let them pee on my mailbox, knowing that my dog's upstairs.
They're Ukrainian spies.
They're
That's
Ukrainian,
what it is. You're Ukrainian spy dogs.
But my point is that Trump, there's a lot of disingenuousness with Trump. He reinvents history to suit his needs. And he can say that he was trying to be strong with Russia as a negotiating point, but there were no negotiations with Russia at that time. And negotiating for what? Again, while he was president, Ukraine's membership was very much front and center on the NATO agenda. Trump never came in and said, nope, sweep that off. Could have solved a lot of problems had he done that. So this is Trump, I think, playing politics here. Now, I'm glad he's taken the right side, but I just want to remind people that this ain't black and white, that Donald Trump is a crafty little manipulator of data. And I think there's a lot of manipulation of data to his advantage right now. He's trying to sell Biden down the river, which Biden deserves to be sold down the river, without acknowledging that he helped put Biden in the river to begin with.
I think so. Also, here's something I thought all along. Part of the whole Russiagate thing was to keep Trump's head down, to keep him behind, for him to keep his head down, because there was fire coming in the whole time and he couldn't really do much of anything. So I think a big part of Trump's first term was they just fired at him nonstop. Boom, boom, boom. You're a Russian bot. We're going to investigate, blah, blah, blah. And Trump couldn't stick his head up to even look around what's going on, not to defend him, but to say, I think Russiagate was intentionally. And if Trump so much as said, perhaps we shouldn't do this or that with
you're right,
Russia, they'd have lit him up. When he
you're
went
right.
to
Remember,
with Putin,
he got impeached over the perfect phone call.
right? Which
And
was right.
when he did, and when he brought Zelensky in, okay, I'm going to take a step back, a rare step back, and I'm going to modify my criticism of Trump to agree that he was never really free to do what he wanted to do, that he came in under this cloud of Russiagate, this manufactured collusion. And anytime he tried to do anything, he got hammered, he got slaughtered, he got impeached. So yeah, I'll give Trump a slight pass on this one.
Yeah. And I would say this, based on what I've seen, especially like the op-ed with his son and RFK Jr., I just think Trump now has a different group of people around him. Look, bottom line is, as my dad used to always say, even God can't change the past, right? That was one of his favorite sayings. But bottom line is, it'd be interesting to see. I'm looking for signals as to what may happen. And I've said all along, Trump's way out of, if he really wants a deal in Ukraine, is to dump it all in Biden's lap and walk away. You know what I mean? To say, hey, if it was me, this would happen. This is a disaster. I got to clean up Biden's disaster so I can move on. That's his way out. But I think what's interesting is that that any politician in America would even say that. So there's a chance. If you can tell the truth, there's a chance. Let's look at another video. I want to get your thoughts on it. Let's go to the next one. So apparently Trump, this is all over the place. Truth Social, Jeffrey Sachs, a guy who I think a lot of, says this, and Trump posts it.
The war in Syria. And you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, oh, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama tasked the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government, starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of narrative. Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, oh, we were so wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Schultzky, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people, how to scare the shit out of the American people. It was a phony war. Where did that war come from? You know what? It's quite surprising. That war came from Netanyahu, actually. You know that? It's weird. And the way it is that Netanyahu had from 1995 onward the theory that the only way we're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments that support them. That's Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the guy's nothing if not obsessive. And he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. He's a deep, dark son of a bitch, sorry to tell you. Because he's gotten us into endless wars, and because of the power of all of this in the U.S. politics, he's gotten his way. But that war was totally phony. So what is this democracy versus dictatorship? Come on. These are not even sensible terms.
You know, let me add a context. And the context is what we're reading everywhere is Trump's going to attack Iran. As soon as he gets in, he's going to attack Iran. And Trump posts this. I could even interpret that as a response from Trump. a signal? I don't know. I'm not, people get mad at me, say you're a pro-Trump. I'm not. I'm a anti-war person, but I'm just looking for signals. But when I look at that, and I have tremendous respect for Jeffrey Sachs, I'm like, Anyway, Scott Ritter, your thought.
Well, I think the important thing here is that two things. One, Trump has talked about two major military interventions by the United States in the region, Iraq and Syria. And he's saying that these were disastrous for us, bad for us. And B, he's blaming Benjamin Netanyahu, because you don't post this without saying, yeah, this is what I believe. And C, he's setting up the Iran issue. Here's the problem for Trump. He withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, in 2018 because of Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu cooked up this fake intelligence raid and fake intelligence data and came in and sold it to Donald Trump, that the Iranians were in violation, they were doing this, they were, et cetera, et cetera. And it didn't matter that much of the material that Netanyahu was, claiming was freshly stolen by the Mossad from Iran was regurgitated stuff from 2004 and 2009. No one wanted to say, well, wait a minute, didn't you try to sell us that once before, the exact same document? And it was deemed to be a fabrication back then. Trump didn't ask that question. Trump went straight on with this. But Netanyahu was doing this to help the United States attack Iran. That's his goal, to topple that regime. Trump, though, was looking for a better deal. What Trump said is this is a bad deal. And frankly speaking, Trump is correct. One of the interesting things about Donald Trump is he's not your normal slimy politician, because he doesn't care. He just says what he believes, and he's not going to lie to you. That's the interesting thing about Donald. I mean, he may lie about, things that people lie about. But when it comes to his vision of America, when I talk about that, I don't know what's going on with Stormy Daniels and all that. That's his business, personal business.
Yeah, I don't care about that.
I could care less.
Yeah.
Is he telling the truth? Is he not? I don't care.
No.
What I care about is what he says about policy. And with Iran, it's important to note that he said this was a bad deal. It was a bad deal. Obama admitted it. I mean, when Obama gives a press conference to NPR in April of 2015, 3 months before approving the JCPOA, and he says, yeah, these sunset clauses that we've put in that are going to expire, when they expire, Iran gets all the enrichment capability at once. We're going to reassess those at the time. And if we're not happy with where Iran is, we may end up, pulling out of the thing. So we never intended to implement this. It was always a fake agreement. And Trump came in and said, this doesn't solve what you say you wanted to solve. You say you wanted to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, but if the sunset clauses expire, Iran will be in a position to have a nuclear weapon. So bad deal. I want a better deal. And he was pushing for a better deal. I think the important thing is he's sending a signal to Netanyahu that Iran is one of his top priorities, but it's not going to be the solution that Netanyahu is looking for. Trump has this peace through strength mantra that he's out there. So he always has to start a negotiation by, putting all the potential ramifications of failure of successful negotiation. That's how he did it with North Korea. I remember when he gave his Fire and Fury speech at the United Nations, I was sitting there going, what the hell is this guy doing? Going up there, United Nations, fire and fear, nuclear rain, da, 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 da. And yet a few months later, the doors open for, the Olympic diplomacy. You remember South Korea had the Winter Olympics, and the North Korean, Kim Jong-un sent his sister, and she began talking. And the next thing you know, Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un. And the diplomacy is taking place. And the deal could have been had, but he got betrayed by Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. I think Trump is putting a signal down to Netanyahu that don't misunderstand when I talk about peace through strength. We're not getting another one of your wars. Okay, you got us into Iraq. You got us into Syria. I'm not going to let you get us into Iran. I'm going to take a different approach to Iran. And this is something that I've been saying. A lot of people, there's a lot of pushback. a lot of pushback because I say that Trump doesn't want a war with Iran. There's a lot of evidence that Trump has indicated that he would be prepared to, take out Iran's nuclear program, et cetera. Well, that's a standard cut and paste, policy statement. I think Trump wants a better deal. And I think the Iranians are looking for a better deal too. They understand that this nuclear freedom that they have is just going to lead to their destruction. There will be a war that will destroy Iran. They may take a whole bunch of people out with them, but it'll destroy Iran. That this nuclear deal isn't giving them the safety they want or anticipated. And I think this new president is looking for an opportunity to bring this problem to a closure so that Iran can get on the business of normalizing its economic interaction with the rest of the world. So I think there's a potential here for a deal with Iran. But the key to that is to put Netanyahu in his place and say, we're not playing the Netanyahu game. And, I just saw it this morning. Netanyahu isn't coming to Trump's inauguration. I think that's because of this video. I think he's perturbed by Trump doing this. And this is also interesting because you remember, you and I have had this talk. When he started appointing people in his cabinet, everybody, including us, were going, it's just Zionist Central. Zionist Central. He's going to be doing Israel's bidding, that and the other thing. But I always threw something out there and I said, but I remember when Donald Trump, talking about the Palestinian issue, said that there's two parties involved here and one doesn't want to negotiate, and that's Israel. And I went, well, wait a minute. If he knows that, then is he really going to allow all that? I think Trump is creating a condition where he can turn to Israel and say, we're not going to let you fail. We're not going to let you fall, but you're not taking us down another Middle East, rabbit hole war. And I think that's the direction we're heading. I think Trump's a heck of a lot more independent on the Israeli issue than we thought. Who would have predicted? Whose bingo card said Donald Trump's going to post Jeffrey Sachs' video? No one. I didn't think it. Did you think it? Did you think he was going to do this? No. And we follow this issue closely. This took me by surprise. It took you by surprise. It took everybody. And I think it's one of those indirect signals. It's the same way he uses proxies to communicate. The Donald Trump Jr. and RFK Jr. op-ed piece that was published in The Hill saying he wants out of Ukraine, doesn't want a nuclear war with Russia, was a signal, because that couldn't have happened without Donald Trump saying that's what I believe. But he created a buffer. And I think the Jeffrey Sachs video gives him a little bit of a buffer too. It's not his words, but he's putting it out there as if to say, that's where I'm coming from. So I think it's an interesting tournament. The proof is always in the pudding, right? And we'll see what happens. But it's a far different posture than if he came out and said, Israel, do or die. I'm down with Israel. I'm riding with Israel. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And we're taking Iran off the face of the map. He's not saying that. And I think his approach towards NATO, where he says, it's about the expansion of NATO, shows that he's starting to take a deeper look into the root causes of all these conflicts that have taken the United States, to the path of war. And he's starting to call out the truth that Ukraine was about NATO expansion and Iran's about Israel, not about the United States, about Israel wanting a war that gets the United States involved. And he doesn't want to play that game. He wants to get out of all this. So interesting.
Well, and what's interesting, I look at the chat and people are like, Trump's an idiot, Trump's a lunatic, Trump's a madman, Trump's all liars. Here's the thing about it. I don't have no idea what Trump's going to do. But as an analyst, what you try to do, and I would say this to the people in the chat, is just kind of look at the smoke signals. You know what I mean? As an analyst, you try to figure out, I wonder what this means. I wonder what that means, right? And you use a context such as time. Why right now? What just happened? And one of the things that's been going on is everybody's like, yeah, Trump's surely going to attack Iran. And from the looks of things, I think Trump reads the headlines. I think Trump reads what's going on online. And one thing's obvious. He's looking around at alternative media. Who knows what he's watching? But he's looking at some alternative media. I tell you this, it is, at least I'm not going to name names, but it's been said there's at least two people in Trump's upcoming administration, if they both get in, who watched the Duran. Yeah, you can't watch the Duran and go and not at least have an understanding of the context, which goes back to this. Scott, we had that big nuclear war event. We've had events. You've had great events. You've been all over the place online. You've been on the Duran. You've got all of this new media or whatever alternative media going on. And it's obvious that Trump and his people are watching some of it. We know for a fact some of them are watching it. And for those who think these discussions don't make a difference, it appears that new media is having a significant effect. Alternative media is having a significant effect on international policy, and dare I say, could save the world. Maybe not from nuclear war, but your thoughts on that, the importance of new media and how it's obvious. Some things are going on here, Scott.
Yeah. I'm just, again, I'm doing what I'm not supposed to do, which is read the chat. But there's somebody in there saying that Scott was just preaching recently about Trump ordering a new kind of nuclear weapon to take out Iran's bomb. Scott doesn't preach anything. Scott simply reports the facts. And the fact is, in 2018, Trump redid the nuclear employment plan of the United States and updated it right before he left in 2020. This is a fact. Scott doesn't preach anything. And this nuclear employment plan incorporated new kinds of nuclear warheads. It's a fact. I'm not preaching. And those warheads were specifically designed to penetrate Iranian underground nuclear facilities. Fact. I'm not preaching anything. Why? Because in order to pressure Iran to come to the negotiating table, you have to be willing to eliminate Iran's nuclear weapons possibility. And you can only do that by taking out the Firdos underground bunker. There's no conventional weapon in the world that can take it out, only a nuclear weapon. And Trump ordered that nuclear weapons be prepared and deployed and incorporated in the plan. Fact, I'm not preaching anything. It's there. And that plan still exists. It still exists for the Biden administration. So when the Biden administration, according to Axios, was talking about a preemptive strike against Iran before Trump comes in to take out their nuclear facilities, they're talking about a nuclear strike, not a conventional strike. And if Trump's talking about attacking Iran, he's talking about the same plan that he ordered back in, a nuclear strike. Scott's not preaching. Scott's telling you the facts. The other fact is Trump appears to want to have a negotiated settlement. You see, there's no inconsistency here, none whatsoever. The facts are the facts, and we know that the United States has prepared a military capability that is designed to eliminate Iran's nuclear weapons potential, and you do that by taking out underground facilities in Natanz, Firdos, and elsewhere, and that can only be done with nuclear weapons. But we also know the United States appears under Trump not to be looking for that kind of decisive conflict, and so he's opening the door for a negotiated settlement. There's no inconsistencies here. You're right. We did have a number of fantastic. We had a great fall, and it wasn't the fall I wanted. I was supposed to go spend half my summer in Russia, completing my project of trying to develop the vaccine for Russophobia. To go to Russia, to meet the Russians, to see the Russians, and to capture that and bring it back here. And I was going to spend the fall trying to educate people that Russia's not a threat worthy of nuclear war. The U.S. government decided that I wasn't going to be allowed to do that. They took my passport, FBI raided my house, the whole thing. What it did is we shifted gears and said, well, our goal still is to prevent nuclear war. And so we took on a purely, stop nuclear war approach, and great success. I mean, you say people are watching. I can tell you right now that because of the anti-nuclear war stance I took, and because of the credibility it received, because of the exposure it was getting on alternative media, that when I reached out to RFK Jr. and said, you need to go to Donald Trump Jr. And this is what you need to say, and you need to do something about this, because this has to happen. We have to have the Trump campaign commit to this. The result was the op-ed piece. And now they wrote it, but I will tell you right now that the first several paragraphs were the text I sent. This is called influence. This is called the ability to influence major things. And this was done via alternative media. We are having an impact. We made a big deal in November about the need for Trump to make a public statement about the ATACMS policies of Biden being stupid. Trump made that statement. People are listening. We are having an impact. This is important. And the important thing is we've got some crazy times coming up ahead of us, Garland. I mean, when Trump becomes president, I've been telling everybody this is a revolution. And if you believe it's a revolution, then revolutionary change is about to happen. And it's going to be unbelievable. And I'm not saying that in a good way. I'm saying you wouldn't believe what's going. Again, who here on the campaign trail, how many times did Trump mention Greenland and the Panama Canal? 0. Didn't talk about it. And yet now that's all everybody's talking about, because Trump has said, I'm going to go in and I'm getting Greenland and I'm getting the Panama Canal. And he's serious about this. This is revolutionary, because what it implies is Trump is taking, if you piece that together with his efforts to withdraw from NATO, withdraw from Europe, to disengage from the Middle East, Trump is walking away from our post-World War II role of world's policeman. And he's saying, no, we're going to create Fortress America. We're creating this Fortress America where we will be self-sufficient and our supply chains won't be compromised by China. And that's his vision. Will it work? I don't know. But that's revolutionary. That is a complete departure from the rules-based international order hegemony that we've been imposing on the world since the end of the Second World War. Complete departure. Will he succeed? I don't know. All I know is we're in for a hell of a ride, because everything that needs to happen to make that happen is going to be completely different than what's happening today. And we're going to see domestically, too, a whole bunch of changes. I truly believe that it wasn't just political talk about reforming the Department of Justice and reforming this and reforming, the system. I think it's real. I think, we are in for a hell of a ride. And I think it's going to be a bumpy ride. I hope we succeed. I'd love to see peace break out all over. But we have a job. Our job as alternative media is to hold him accountable for what he said. Our job is to make sure that, we don't give him a free pass, because this is a democracy still. And in order for a democracy to function, those whom we elect to higher office have to be held accountable for what they do in our name. And the mainstream media isn't going to do that. They have no credibility. Who has credibility? You have credibility. I have credibility. Judge Napolitano has credibility. Danny Haifong has credibility. All these podcasters out there that are doing this, they all have credibility because they've been doing the hard job. They're the ones that are injecting fact-based truth into the debate and encouraging fact-checker-free debate, discussion, and dialogue. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not a fan of facts. I'm very fan of facts. But as soon as I hear, Facebook or Meta and fact checkers, that's not it. That's the government stifling our ability to say things like the Ukraine war was about NATO expansion.
Exactly. And, the people in the chat, they're great. And I'm glad that they have these conversations. And I welcome criticism. A lot of people, I've had some people say, you got to get these. I welcome criticism. Great. That's what this is about. You can't criticize on MSNBC or CNN and Fox. Criticize here all you want. But one week, I remember Trump got elected. We're like, well, maybe he'll do something different. And then he named some neocons. We're like, God darn you, Trump. And then this week, we may be looking at it saying, well, I hope he does that. That's a good idea. The next week, we may be, that stupid Trump, why'd he do that? So you're not going to get that. I'll say this, you're not going to get that on the mainstream media. They take one position. It is the position that was given to them by their CIA handler, and that's the position they're going to stay with. Here, we're trying to figure things out the same as you. So continue in the chat. criticize Scott and I, criticize Trump. If you like him, say he's great. This is what this is about. I think the chat is, I'll add this. I used to say I shouldn't look at the chat, but now I think the chat is an important part of alternative media, Scott.
It is. It's
really,
a very important part.
Because on CNN, you watch it and they tell you a bunch of crap and you can't criticize it and you can't give anything. And like sometimes I like at the end, I'll look at the super chats and people will have questions and I'll answer it. You ain't going to get that on CNN. So I think an important part and one of the things that attracts people to alternative media is that they can actually be a part of the conversation, and they can watch Scott and Garland will look at what some guy who was at, Meep Zorp 412 and say, what do you know? At Meep Zorp 412 said blah, blah, blah. You ain't never happening on CNN. And I think as much as some of them aggravate me and I love some of them and all that stuff, I do think it's important that their voice is heard.
Well, imagine if, back in the day, I think one of the biggest favors the FBI did to me was when they came into my house. They did something to my my cable box, and I'm not getting cable news. I mean, there's a way to do it, but it's not convenient, which is fine for me because because what would happen is I'd sit there watching TV and I'd start screaming things at CNN people. No, that's garbage. Well, you know what I was? I was the chat. But the thing is, CNN had no clue. So I'm sitting there screaming and shouting and all that. But imagine if every once in a while when I scream shout, the CNN host would go, oh, well, Scott Ritter's in Del Mar, New York right now, throwing a fit. He's saying this and that and the other thing. But Scott, let me tell you why we're saying what we're saying. I suddenly sit there and go, okay, I'm going to watch CNN because there's feedback. There's a feedback loop taking place. And yeah, so I do think that plus the other thing too is imagine, in order to watch mainstream media, I guess people do it, but if everybody was on their cell phones in a group chat, watching the same show going, this is what I think. There's a lot to be said about, multiple different points of view coming in and that creates that debate dial. Some of it's garbage. As you said, we can have, Thorpe thinks whatever, 2614, anonymous, fat boy living in his mother's basement, maybe, I don't know, because we don't know. It's anonymous, but they'll say that. But there's other people out there who I look at their names and I've seen them in other things, and they're responsible in terms of their approach. They don't always agree, but when I look at their disagreement, I have to pause and say, I wonder why they're disagreeing. What's going on here? So I do think alternative media is a unique space. It requires a lot of patience to wade through it. But in the end, the product isn't just you and I talking. The product is our impact on a broader audience, and that broader audience's impact on things that matter in the country. We're actually having a greater impact on things that matter in the country than mainstream media, which is today just a joke.
Yeah, there's an article here. I didn't bring it up, but I think I did want to get your thoughts on this. And does it mean anything? I don't know. Ukraine must take responsibility for Nazi legacy Polish presidential candidate. And he says, Polish presidential candidate Karol Nawrocki has claimed that Kiev has no future in the EU and NATO until it takes responsibility for the Volhynia massacre, blah, blah, blah. Here's what's interesting. And he says, a country that is unable to account for a very brutal crime committed against 120,000 of its neighbors cannot be part of international alliances. Now, here's what's interesting. And that is Poland, that's supposed to be all there. They want to be the next cannon fodder. The people don't, but apparently some of the leaders do. It seems to me as we get closer to Trump, and I think everybody, if you've been paying attention, he despises Zelensky. And I literally think he's on the kill list and they tried to act on it. But that may be some people who aren't thrilled with these people. No, Zelensky's made some enemies. He's been going around the EU, and because Big Brother Joe, one of these guys, I can say anything I want to you because my big brother will kick your ass. Don't you know who my big brother is? And he's been going around pushing people, bullying people, because he's got Biden, and he's made some real enemies. And I think that this is maybe a sign. I don't even know this guy, that some of the people who've been pissed at Zelensky, who have been aggravated at them picking them clean, will now feel okay to come out and say, screw you, Zelensky. Screw you, Zelensky. I never liked you. That all of his enemies are going to start coming out of the woodworks. Anyway, Scott.
Yeah, back in June of 2022, no, 2023. I made a 2-part documentary that was put out called Agent Zelensky, which basically tore him down, exposed the reality of this guy. I mean, it came out, and the first day part 1 was released, it had like 250,000 views. It was moving up and all, and then YouTube went, oh, bam, killed it, and that was the end of Agent Zelensky part 1. Part 2 came out, and snuck it in there to YouTube, and basically, part 1, what happened is YouTube put the adult content on it or something like that. That the thing that where you have to click in and then register, and that just slows down. Yeah. It basically it throttles it. It kills the viewership. Part 2 came out, and despite the throttling, got like 60,000 views before YouTube basically pulled the whole thing from the web, and then shortly thereafter booted me from YouTube. Why? For telling the truth about Zelensky. The reason why I bring this up is that, for a while there, that the 2-part documentary disappeared, because the Ukrainians had successfully convinced people that it was, propaganda, Russian talking points. Everything in there is factual. Lately, though, I'm getting people calling me back, and people are starting to say, hey, you said this in Agents, because they're starting to see the reality. You see, as Ukraine starts to fall, the lies that had been distorting, creating this image of Ukraine, and the roots. I mean, when you have Trump replaying Jeffrey Sachs saying, or when Trump's saying that this is all about NATO, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I got kicked off of YouTube. Is I was saying it was all about NATO, NATO expansion. You're starting to have people come out and point out the fundamental flaws of Zelensky. One of the things that you weren't allowed to say is that the Ukrainian government was under the sway of Western Ukrainian nationalists who have a history of supporting Nazi ideology. Not just Nazi ideology, but actual Nazis. They were allies with Hitler. We're not allowed to talk about that. Today, people are starting to realize, hey, a lot of the problems in Ukraine today is that these wackos, I mean, Zaluzhny is, the general, he has a picture of Stepan Bandera in his office. That's a problem. That's like somebody trying to say that they have a picture of David Duke in their office, but I'm not affiliated with the KKK. No, I think it's a cool portrait. David Duke, who's David Duke? Oh, KKK, what's KKK? I don't understand. You know exactly what you're doing. You put a photo of David Duke in there, you're KKK. You're sympathetic to it. If you're a Ukrainian general and you have a photograph of Stepan Bandera, or a portrait of Bandera, you're a Banderist. If you're the head of the Ukrainian military and at every gathering of troops, they sing the ode to Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera is my father. He is this. You're a Banderist. You're a Nazi. There's a problem. And so people are starting to call it out, and the mainstream media is not disguising that anymore. They're not trying to shellac that over. And people are starting to look at Agent Zelensky and say, wait a minute, you were saying that, a year and a half ago. Yeah, because it's the truth. And now we're starting to see the truth slowly make its way out.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Something else I'd like to get your thoughts on. I remember on a radio show that's since been discontinued in Washington, D.C. that I was on with Dr. Wilmer Leon. Scott was a regular guest. And one of the first things that Scott Ritter said was, most of these leaders and these governments at the very beginning, the first couple weeks of the conflict, are going to fall. Most of these are going to fall. And we see this fight to hold on, by the US and NATO, right? The neocons are fighting to hold on the ones they're losing. Germany, which is interesting. And one of the things that people have not discussed is this. You can't, to me, talk about the German election on February 28th 3rd without acknowledging that it'll be 1 month after Trump comes in. And whatever we talk about the German election now is going to be a different discussion. We don't know how, but a month after it's going to change the dynamics there. But one thing's for sure, we're seeing AFD, we're seeing Sarah Wagenknecht, whatever we're seeing new parties come up. They may not even agree on things, but it seems to me that that was quite prophetic. What do you see the direction? And might I add, it looks like Trump wants the hell out of all of that stuff. It looks like he hates all of those. He despises Trudeau, Schultz, Starmer, Zelensky. He despises every one of them. Your thoughts on European politics, Scott, from a man who's lived in Europe?
I did a podcast yesterday that had a German audience focus. As one of the things they were talking about is election coming up, and the German mainstream media is putting more focus on this Christian Democratic Party and a guy named Merz. I guess they're saying he's going to be the next chancellor. And I said, really? Because Merz is just taking Schultz's policies and cleaning them up. There's no difference. He wants to double down, provide Taurus missiles to Ukraine and all that. AFD doesn't want to do any of that. Now, if I'm the German if I were a German going to the polls in February and Kamala Harris was being sworn in on January 20th here in the United States, and Kamala Harris said, we're going to continue to support Ukraine. If I were the Germans, I'd say, well, God, we might as well get in step with the United States. We're going to vote for the CPD over or the CDP over AFD. But on January 20th, there's a new sheriff in town. And I will tell you this, not a single German Taurus missile will make it to Ukraine, even if because the United States won't let it happen. We're not going to extend this conflict. We're not going to double down on stupid. Trump wants out. And if Germany thinks that they're going to take the lead, watch how quickly we shut down their economy. Trump understands the leverage the United States holds over Europe. We can sanction the living dog poop out of them. We can shut things down, and we have greater ability to sustain ourselves than they do. They will collapse before we do. So if I'm a German now going to the polls on February 12th, I think it is, I'm going to say, why don't we elect the politicians that are in line with the power that's going to have the greatest influence on Europe, on Germany in the next couple of years, the United States. Because the United States, the influence we're going to have is at least twofold, threefold. One, we're going to bring an end to the conflict with Russia. We're going to redefine European security priorities. Two, we're going to get out of NATO. If you don't think that's what's going to happen, you're not listening to Donald Trump. We're out of there. And three, we're going to take down the European Union. Trump doesn't want to deal with this artificial entity called the European Union. He wants to deal with individual nation states who look out for their own national interest. Trump has always said, I appreciate when a national leader says, I put my country first. He says, but that's what I do with America. So I appreciate that. We're going to have a negotiation, but I appreciate that. But right now, you have one of the reasons why Trump hates Trudeau, Macron, Schultz, and these others is that they put Europe first. And Trump's like, what are you doing? Europe is nothing. What about France? What about Germany? You know who he likes? Giorgia Meloni. Giorgia Meloni is an Italian who puts Italy first. She talks about what's best for Italy. He may not agree with her policies, but he respects the hell out of that. And that's why she went to Mar-a-Lago to have the meeting with Musk and also with Trump. So Europe is going to be fundamentally. Do you remember? I mean, how every time the Trump administration opens its mouth, we have never been more unified with the Europeans than we are today. NATO has never been stronger and more unified than it is today. I think Emmanuel Macron has just called upon Europe to get ready to go to war against the United States if Trump makes an effort on Greenland. How the hell unified are we now? Trump's job, and he's doing this on purpose, he is destroying the connectivity between Europe and the United States will make it so much easier for him to unplug from NATO when the time comes. This is the reality of Europe. I wrote an article in December of 2021, and I was on your show talking about this article, you and Garland, you and Wilmer's show, where I said, and I remember the conversation we had. I said that if Europe goes along with the sanctioning of Russia, if they enter into the sanctions thing, it will lead to the destruction of Europe and revolutionary political change, and none of these leaders will survive this conflict. And look what's happening. Schultz is gone. Macron is history. The United Kingdom's in its third iteration of a prime minister, about to get a fourth iteration. Austria has a pro-Russian. Romania elected a president to be a pro-Russian president, but then we conspired to get a court to overturn that. But he still has a shot at being president. Down the board in Poland, you finally have a politician able to step up and say the Ukrainians are Nazis. Straight up, that's what he said. They're Nazis, and they have to knock this stuff off. You're seeing change. All these leaders, one by one, are going to topple. And what you're going to have are nationalists, people who are looking out for their best interests first, understanding that the European Union has taken them down a path towards hell, and to prevent themselves from burning, they have to redefine themselves as being German or French or something. And that's the direction we're heading. And that's the exact opposite of what the European Union stands for. The European Union is about to find yourself as a European. What does that mean? There is no Europe. There is no European. It's an artificial concept that's led to weakness. And watch how quick it collapses. Watch how Europe starts to turn. And Trump is a master at this. This is what he did. I mean, people could joke, and I'm ignoring the chats right now because I'm sure they're saying that, the FBI got to Scott Ritter and he has to say these things and, whatever. But the point is, no. If you go back, Trump had that show, the reality show where, The Apprentice. And the whole concept of The Apprentice was to pit people against people and watch and see how people react and see who the stronger person was and all that. And then you're fired and move on. You don't think that's what Trump is doing right now deliberately to Europe? Just sitting there going, how can I piss them off today? How can I test them? I'll say this, I'll say that, and I'll watch what they do and watch them fight amongst each other. And Trump is doing that because his job is to tear down Europe. We have to, a cornerstone element of Trump's new world vision is we have to disengage from Europe. We can't be involved in that NATO trap. He said this back in September. He gave a presentation at in Texas, I think it was the National Economic Club or something of that nature, where he just straight up said the number one enemy of the United States in the world today is the United States. And it's because we have this establishment that locks us into these forever wars. And we have to break that. NATO, he called NATO out and said, that's a problem. He called Europe out. That's a problem. That speech got a little bit of airplay, and then people, ignored it. Trump said it. And that's what he's doing right now. I think his job, he's turning Europe into a giant apprentice set where he's just creating the conditions for people to fight amongst each other until one emerges that he can do business with.
It's funny. I was just looking. I like to look in the chat, and somebody said, "Yeah, but Garland," I mentioned another guest. What Scott's saying doesn't align with what your other guest said. And I'm thinking to myself, if you're looking for consistency, you got the wrong channel.
Yeah. Go to CNN.
I'm going to bring people on from all over the ideological scale. To me, this is what new media is about. The problem I have with CNN, look, I would be fine if MSNBC had put Rachel Maddow out on to say everything's about Putin and he's doing it everything. And then they brought on somebody who said, hey, I disagree and everything is different. And, they brought on somebody who came on with a Russian flag hat on and said, hey, I'm a Putin fan.
Jackson Hinkle. Yeah, Rachel Maddow and Jackson Hinkle.
1 hour each one. I'm okay with.
Yeah.
I want some ideological inconsistency. Let us look at all of them to make a change. Now, here's something that your thoughts on, and I think, okay, so there's lots of threats going on with Iran. Iran has also discovered one of the biggest gas fields in the world. They are loaded with natural resources, and they have a pretty significant industrial base also. Russia's supposed to be, and my understanding is January 17th is maybe the day they're signing an alliance with Iran that's military, and my understanding of it is all the way up to we ain't going to send troops, but everything up to leading that, it's kind of, I put it like this recently. The U.S. would say we're doing this porcupine strategy with country X. With the other country wants to attack them, so we're going to make them so tough that the other country doesn't want to attack them. Well, Iran has already shown they have a pretty
what we did in Ukraine. That's our whole approach to Ukraine
and Taiwan.
But
it was
approach, yeah.
But that was at least that was the rhetoric, right? Really, they wanted to bait them in and get them destroyed as hell. But the rhetoric was we're going to make them. But it seems to me that's kind of what's happening with both North Korea and Iran with Russia. I think Iran's going to have all kinds of nasty stuff, and the Houthis appear to already. But at any rate, your thoughts on that, Scott?
Well, I'll say historically, both the Soviet Union and Russia, they don't like entangling alliances. So anybody who thinks that the 17th January agreement, security agreement, is going to be a NATO type document with an Article 5 clause, all that, I think you're going to be disappointed. But this is a strategic relationship, and we've already seen elements of this. Iran, look, Russia has a great defense industry that's capable of producing fantastic equipment. But the nature of this conflict was such that the Russian approach to breaking the Western air defense network, integrated network that Ukraine had put in place, wasn't working. And Russia wasn't getting the impact it needed to get on the Ukrainian energy sector and industrial sector in terms of bringing it down. It was the Shahed 136 that changed that game. When the Iranians provided Russia with, however they did it, whether it was kits or they provided the blueprints, and we know Russia's building it now, mass producing them. But we know that Iran has provided stuff too. This was a game changer by being able to integrate the Shahed 136 into a suppression of enemy air defense campaign. Surovikin, if you remember his name, he was the guy who did it. He came up with this campaign to break the Ukrainian air defense, the Patriots, the Iris-T, and all these weapon systems coming in. And it was the Shahed 136 that enabled this to happen. And that's because of Iran. And Iran's provided other assistance as well. North Korea is providing assistance as well because there's now a relationship with North Korea. They've ratified a similar agreement. Russia isn't going to Article 5 North Korea if it's attacked, but what Russia's doing is ensuring that North Korea has all of the ability to defend itself so that anybody attacking will pay a very heavy price. And they're going to do that with Iran. But Iran doesn't need, Iran just finished an exercise. I can't remember the name of it, Prophet 18 or something of that nature. But they're putting out some fascinating new technology. And again, the technology shows that Russia and Iran have been talking, exchanging data, and Iran has been improving on this concept. They have massed loitering weapon systems now that can saturate a battlefield. This is what the Lancet was supposed to be doing. Russia talked about they were going to bring in the Lancet and they were going to, you're going to fire 100 Lancets that were going to talk to each other and then pick out their targets and hit. And Russia never got it to that level. An interesting question is why? And maybe because it was too expensive and the Russians found cheaper ways to deal with it. Maybe it wasn't going to work the way the Russians thought it was. Maybe enemy countermeasures. I don't know. But the Iranians have fielded that system now. It is a literal battlefield saturation system of AI-empowered loitering drones that will launch, go in, talk to each other, pick their targets, come down and hit. Um, that's because of interaction with Russia. And you're going to see a lot more of that. And I think the importance of this, because we're talking about the military aspect, but there's an economic aspect of it as well. This railroad that's going to run from St. Petersburg all the way down to, I think, Bandar Abbas or Chabahar, greatly, not just simplifies, but it makes more cost effective, commerce between Russia and Iran. This is a game changer. And I think you're going to see that this document helps secure Iran, which is an important thing. This is the importance of the document. If Iran is going to sit down with the United States to negotiate away its nuclear weapons potential, it can't do that in a vacuum. And I think the Russian treaty actually empowers Iran to say, okay, we're going to be secure using conventional capabilities, and our economy is going to be secure so that we're not totally dependent upon the lifting of sanctions, so that we can be a little bit tougher in these negotiations, ask for a little bit more. It's not going to be a surrender. And that's what I think the importance of this treaty is that it empowers Iran to do things that are in the best interest of Iran. And a war with the United States and Israel is not in the best interest of Iran. It's not in the best interest of anybody. And that's why I don't think you're going to hear too much shouting from the Trump administration about this treaty.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think if they play their cards properly, it'll work for them. I think they want to get out of some of the messes and just that have been created. We still got up until the 20th, so let's cross our fingers, because God only knows what these lunatics are going to do between now and the 20th.
Yeah.
We've got now Venezuela's they're playing the Juan Guaido card again. Venezuela's getting ready to they had their election. I think the 10th is when Maduro comes back in, and they're like, well, he better step down by the 20th, otherwise bad things are going to happen. Apparently now we're hearing,
There's a coup.
Yes,
a coup in Venezuela. I mean, an attempted overthrow. Yeah, they've captured 125 CIA-backed, revolutionaries. What do you want to call them? American. I think they've captured 3 Americans. They've captured some Ukrainians. They've captured. I mean, this is a major effort to overthrow the Maduro government. That's Blinken and Biden backed, and Maduro appears to have beaten it.
Well,
So,
I've been following them, and I follow like Orinoco Tribune, some of the Venezuelan sites, and I've had friends in Venezuela, and it seems to me that Venezuela over the last year has gotten much better, the last year or two, much better at thwarting these U.S. operations. They've been knocking the hell out of them, and it leads me to believe that other countries who have very, very good and powerful intelligence abilities are assisting Venezuela. It leads me to believe that maybe Russia, maybe China, it's in their best interest to use their intelligence assets, because these types of things, I mean, Venezuela just went, and apparently there was Ukrainians and there was all this other stuff, and Venezuela just went and arrested them. They just went, They knew where they were, they grabbed them. I would say this, in my opinion, Ukraine's crawling with Russian spies. From one end, I've heard it said, there's not a blade of grass moves in Venezuela. I mean, in Ukraine that the Russians don't know about. So if Ukraine, foolishly, if the U.S. are using Ukrainians or some of their diabolical deeds, there ain't no way in the hell that Russian intelligence doesn't know about it. And I suspect that's one of the other things that are going on. When you talk about assistance, and we've got to get ready to go, but I'll say this. When you talk about Russia assisting Iran or Venezuela or whoever, right, or China even, one of the most powerful tools that they have is their intelligence operations, their ability to intercept, their ability to, all those kinds of things. And I suspect Russia and or China that a big part of their assistance is intelligence gathering operation. Scott, before we go, let's your thoughts.
yeah, I would say that there's not a blade of grass in Venezuela that doesn't move without Cuba knowing about it too. I think the missing link here is Cuban intelligence, which linguistically and culturally, they're able to operate in Venezuela far more efficiently than Russian and Chinese intelligence. The Russians and Chinese bring some capabilities together. I mean, this is, for instance, when we went in, and I'm not justifying this or glorifying this, I'm just stating a fact. When, to hunt down the, some of the drug cartel leaders in Colombia, the Colombians had the foot soldiers on the ground, but we brought in some very specialized intelligence capabilities that enabled them to really close in and seal the deal. I think the Cubans and the Venezuelans are working very closely together. And I think the Russians and the Chinese are providing some specific capabilities that tighten that up even more. But I agree. I look, the way to change Venezuela isn't to try and do these ridiculous Juan Guaido clone type movements. The way to do it is at the election booth, and that takes a long-term strategy of building a legitimate democratic opposition, not a CIA-funded opposition, but a legitimate grassroots opposition that, over time wins the trust of the people. Maduro, is a legacy of Chavez and all this kind of stuff. He's revolutionary, but there isn't a political system that can tolerate the same person ruling forever. There's always going to be people say, I could do better. And so all we need to do is trust the Venezuelan people to figure out what they need and then to let it happen. And then you'll see, I believe, in the next one or two election cycles, Maduro would be compelled to step aside, not because he was overthrown by foreign powers, but because the Venezuelan people said, hey, thank you very much for the past couple decades, but we need to move on to get new political blood. That's the best way. That's the best approach to resolving these issues. But that's not how we operate. We have to be in control. We have to dictate outcomes. And our outcomes are never premised on what's best for the Venezuelan people. It's always premised on what's best for us, which usually entails disruption, chaos, and anarchy that we can exploit to create crisis and conflict that feeds into the military-industrial complex. But that is what
I'll end up saying this, a guy who knows a good bit about Venezuela and having spent time there. It is the United States that's creating the dynamic that keeps Maduro in power. And I'm not opposed to Maduro. Here's the bottom line. He was Chavez's right-hand man, and Chavez is virtually a saint, you know what I mean, in Venezuela, right? So they huddle around the legacy of Chavez. As long as the U.S. is after him, they're like, well, he was Chavez's right-hand man. They huddle around him. We create a dynamic that's going to keep him in power because they're like, oh my gosh, he's been in power. If he goes down, the legacy of Chavez that we like is gone. And I go back to the then perspective. If you walk by and you see a muddy puddle, how do you clear that puddle up? Leave it alone. If you stir that puddle up, it's just going to stay muddy. You have to walk away and leave that puddle alone, and the sediment will go to the bottom, and it'll be nice and clear. How do you want to fix it or fix this or that? Leave it alone and allow it to heal and repair itself. And perhaps we should stop sanctioning 99% of their income. I think that may have an influence on their ability to move forward.
The best way to get Venezuela on our side, I believe, is to lift all the sanctions and allow them to sell their oil and let them see how the economic benefits of doing business with the United States. And then, for us to sit back there and say, yeah, this is the model. This is it. We're willing to work with you. And the people go, we're comfortable with that. And they elect politicians that want to do that kind of business.
We shall see. Scott Ritter, what the important thing is, tell everybody before we go, tell everybody again about the events you got coming up here in DC and in Poughkeepsie.
Well, thanks. No, next week on actually Tuesday, the 14th, Anya Kay, the Polish podcaster who does a fantastic podcast Through the Eyes of Anya Kay. I've been on, I think, have you been on her podcast?
I don't know. I can't tell you.
We'll get you on it. But she does a great job. But she and I collaborated on a book called Covering Ukraine. And it's basically derived from 2 years worth of interviews that Anya Kay did with me. And it provides a very concise, thorough, in one volume look at how we got to where we are in Ukraine today. And that's a very important subject moving into January 20th. So she's coming over on January 15th in the Bronx. We have a book event at an Italian restaurant there. On January 19th in Washington, D.C., we're doing a book event at Busboys and Poets. That's a fantastic venue in Washington, D.C. This will be the 14th and V flagship location. And then on the 21st in Poughkeepsie, New York at Farmers and Chefs, we'll be doing a book event there. Again, you can find all the details about it at scottritter.com. You'll see the site. The Busboys and Poets event is free. Both the Bronx event and the Poughkeepsie event are ticketed events, and that's just the reality. We can't hold these are at restaurants. You're going to get great food, so you know the ticket includes the price of a meal. You get a book in the price of the ticket, and then there's a little bit overhead that's used to pay for Anya's hotels, transportation, things of that nature. So we're not trying to gouge anybody. It's just the reality of it. But we'd appreciate whatever support you can do. We'd love to see everybody there. It'll be a fantastic, informative discussion, and you'll get a chance to get Covering Ukraine signed not just by me but by Anya K.
Wow, get it. That both
2 for 1. Yeah.
There we go. All right, everyone. Go to scottritter.com to follow Scott Ritter. And while you're there, please, if you can afford it, donate. If not, just share scottritter.com on all your social media platforms. Share this on all your social media platforms. We have a join button now here, so you can join and become a member. It's like $4.99 a month. So please become a member of this channel. If you can afford to donate, that's great. Otherwise, as I said, just share this on all your social media platforms. We are